Imagine this for a second. A massive, complex democracy, not content with just electing a government in the capital, but actively ensuring that power is structurally, turned completely upside down and fully reconstituted every 5 years, and not just in big cities, but across a staggering 250,000 villages. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into that foundational layer, the beating heart of India's rural democracy, the Panchayati Raj system. This whole structure, cemented by the 73rd Constitutional Amendment, it's one of the most radical experiments in decentralized self-governance anywhere in the world. This deep dive is tailor-made for high-level preparation. We're thinking of all you learners preparing for competitive exams who really need to move beyond just the facts and into some critical analysis. We're drawing our insights exclusively from the bedrock text, Laxmikanth's Indian Polity, specifically Chapter 39, Panchayati Raj. Our mission today is crystal clear. We want to meticulously extract the constitutional framework, trace the precise historical path that led to this constitutional compulsion.
And most importantly, for your analytical edge, we're going to critically examine the real-world, on-the-ground operational challenges that are facing local self-governance today. Okay, let's unpack this monumental journey from a mere aspiration to a powerful, though still struggling, constitutional reality.
And before we get started on that rigorous journey, I just want to take a quick moment to welcome all of you, our dedicated learners. We really do appreciate the commitment you show to mastering all these critical nuances of Indian polity. And on that note, we have to give massive shout out to all our existing paid members. Your sustained support is just, it's essential. It enables us to invest the immense time that's required for this kind of high-quality research and synthesis. It allows us to bring you this super useful, in-depth content that's tailored specifically for your rigorous preparation. We truly, truly appreciate your support. And to our new listeners, we'd like to humbly ask, if you find this material useful, if it's valuable, and if you're capable of doing so, please consider subscribing to our channel and joining our paid membership. Your decision to support us is honestly what keeps this high-quality analytical content flowing.
Exactly. And while you're thinking about how this content can help your preparation, please, if you can, just take a second and hit that like button right now. And share a valuable comment below. Let us know what constitutional concept you want us to deep dive into next. Your engagement really helps us reach more dedicated learners just like you. And just a quick note on resources. Remember, free notes summarizing this entire discussion, along with practice previous year questions. The PYQs are available right now on our Telegram channel. And for our Legend YouTube members, we've got premium notes, extra PYQs, and model mains answers for those really tough mains questions waiting for you on our dedicated Discord channel. So do join there to maximize your preparation.
Okay, so setting the stage, our core mission today is to trace the precise constitutional evolution of these local bodies. We're moving from a situation where local self-governance was merely a suggestion, a non-justiciable idea.
Just an idea.
Exactly. A directive principle under Article 40. We're moving from that to a fully constitutionally protected mandatory institution. This required navigating the really complex architecture of Part 9X of the Constitution, specifically Articles 243 to 243.0. That conceptual shift, from a suggestion a state might follow to a mandatory justiciable framework, is arguably the single most important constitutional change affecting rural India since independence.
Let's start with that historical context, because understanding why the 73rd Amendment was even needed, it really eliminates its genius. Before 1992, Panchayati Raj bodies, well, they certainly existed in some form.
They did, but they were fundamentally weak. That's the key.
Right. They were administrative creatures of state law, completely at the mercy of the state governments.
That's the critical point to grasp. You had Article 40 nestled within the directive principles of state policy. It said that the state shall take steps to organize village panchayats and endow them with powers and authority to function as units of self-government.
Shall take steps. So a direction, not a command.
Exactly. And as you know, directive principles are non-justiciable. They're aspirational goals. They're not legal mandates. A court can't force a government to implement them.
So states were encouraged to decentralize, but they weren't, compelled to. What was the practical consequence of this constitutional gap between the aspiration and the reality on the ground?
The consequences were, frankly, devastating for grassroots democracy. These local bodies faced a set of chronic, predictable problems. Firstly, and this was a huge one, irregular elections. State governments could just postpone elections indefinitely for political convenience.
So a panchayat could exist for a decade without a single election.
Or more. There was no constitutional clock ticking. Secondly, there was the issue of arbitrary supersession. Panchayats could be dissolved at the whim of the state government without any constitutional requirement to restore them quickly.
So local body gets a little too independent.
And poof, it's gone, dissolved by an executive order. And crucially, thirdly, fiscal starvation. This was maybe the most crippling issue. Without a constitutional mandate for financial devolution, local bodies were perpetual beggars, totally dependent on discretionary grants from the state capital.
So this inconsistency, this structural weakness meant that the Gandhian ideal of Gram Swaraj village self-rule remained largely on paper. The political and legislative machinery just didn't have the uniformity or the compulsion needed to sustain these institutions.
And that's the intellectual drive behind the reforms we're about to discuss. The need to move beyond this wishy-washy non-justiciability and create a constitutionally protected right to local democracy.
Absolutely. And this drive, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was fueled by a series of critical committees. The journey wasn't straight. There were several attempts in the 1980s. But we should really detail the two most crucial committees from the late 80s that provided the final viable blueprint for the constitutional amendment.
Let's begin with the Thungon Committee in 1988. Now, they were tasked specifically with examining the administrative structure at the district level for the purpose of planning.
So their mandate was planning, but what was their radical contribution at that time?
Their key recommendation was a fundamental shift in thinking. They proposed constitutional recognition for Panchayati Raj bodies.
So taking them out of state law and putting them into the Constitution itself.
Exactly. This was revolutionary because it proposed moving PRIs from a simple state statute to the Constitution, which would ensure legal permanency. They also recommended the establishment of a standard, mandatory three-tier system at the village, block or intermediate, and district levels.
And that was aimed at solving the structural chaos, right? Where different states had different models or sometimes no real model at all.
Precisely. It was about creating uniformity and predictability.
Okay, so the Thungon Committee gave us the idea of structural permanence and uniformity. But the next committee, the Gadgil Committee, also formed in 1988, really provided the operational mechanics that define the final act. They seem to have understood that structure alone was completely insufficient. These bodies needed real teeth.
That's right. The Gadgil Committee's recommendations became the absolute foundation for the eventual constitutional bill. They strongly reiterated the necessity of constitutional status for survival and effectiveness, and they agreed on the three-tier structure. But they went much, much further. They addressed the endemic problems we just mentioned head-on.
Like the arbitrary dissolution.
Exactly. To tackle that, they proposed a fixed, non-negotiable term of 5 years. This was the key safeguard against political interference from the state level.
And their proposals regarding representation, I mean, they fundamentally changed the demographics of power in rural India forever.
Oh, profoundly. They mandated the direct election of members at all 3 levels, which ensures genuine democratic legitimacy from the ground up. But the social justice element was what was so profound. They insisted on mandatory reservation for scheduled castes, SCs, and scheduled tribes, STs, and this had to be proportional to their population.
And the women's reservation.
And crucially, they introduced the mandate for reservation for women. This was not just tokenism. This was a systemic injection of diversity into the political system, directly addressing the historical underrepresentation of marginalized groups.
So moving beyond the structure and representation, the Gadgil Committee shifted the role of panchayats from just being, implementers of state schemes to actual centers of planning and resource control.
That is the analytical hinge point of the whole reform. They mandated that PRI should be responsible for the preparation and implementation of plans for socioeconomic development.
So they're not just building roads because the state told them to. They're deciding which road to build.
Exactly. And to make this real, they proposed that a specific list of subjects, which eventually materialized as the 29 subjects in the 11th schedule, be enshrined in the Constitution itself. This gave panchayats a defined constitutional scope of work, moving them away from being mere administrative placeholders.
And this would require money and, of course, electoral integrity. How did they propose to secure those 2 pillars?
They proposed the twin pillars of autonomy. It's a brilliant design. Firstly, empowering panchayats to levy, collect, and appropriate taxes and duties themselves. This was to ensure a stream of internal resource generation.
So they wouldn't just be waiting for handouts.
Right. And secondly, and perhaps most importantly, they proposed the establishment of a State Finance Commission, SFC, for regular non-discretionary financial allocation from the state. and the State Election Commission, SEC, for conducting truly independent and periodic elections.
And these two commissions were the constitutional guarantees needed to ensure that the fixed term and financial resources were actually respected by the state government.
They were the watchdogs, the constitutional enforcers of autonomy.
Okay, so after all this incredible foundational work, the legislative journey was still turbulent. I remember attempts in 1989 failed. What was the political breakthrough that finally made this act a reality?
The breakthrough finally arrived under the P.V. Narasimha Rao government. Recognizing the political and constitutional necessity, they took the core proposals, primarily from that Gadgil blueprint, and they streamlined them. They removed some of the more controversial elements that had caused political friction before, like mandatory central government intervention, and introduced the amendment bill in September 1991. And after much debate, it finally passed as the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, 1992.
And for every learner out there focusing on factual recall, the date this monumental overhaul came into force, marking the constitutional birth of local democracy in India, was April 24th, 1993, a date that really transformed Panchayati Raj from a directive principle, a nice idea, into a constitutional mandate that the states could no longer ignore.
So with the act coming into force, it inserted this whole new constitutional framework. Part 9X, titled the Panchayats, covering Articles 243 to 243-0 and that new 11th schedule with its 29 functional matters. This framework brought about a level of structural uniformity in local governance that India had never seen before.
Let's look at that structure imposed by Article 243B, the mandatory three-tier system. This is the key structural uniformity measure, isn't it?
It is. The Act mandates this three-tier system in every state. The Gram Panchayat at the village level, the Panchayat Samiti, which is the intermediate panchayat at the block level, and the Zila Parishad at the district level. This design ensures that every rural area in the country has a clear institutional framework for administration and democratic representation.
But the Constitution is also, famously aware of India's immense demographic diversity. Article 243B includes a crucial exception to this uniformity. Why was that flexibility necessary?
It was crucial to avoid imposing an unnecessary administrative weight on states with smaller populations. It's a very practical provision. The Act explicitly grants an exemption. States with a population not exceeding 20 lakh, that's 2 million, may choose not to constitute panchayats at the intermediate level.
So can you give us a sense of which states would benefit from this 20 lakh exemption, just to make it more concrete?
Sure. Typically, this exemption benefits smaller states, often in the northeast or the hilly regions. So you're thinking of places like Goa, Sikkim, and some of the smaller union territories or newly created states. The analytical tie-in here is that the Constitution respects demographic realities. It mandates the foundational structure, which is the village and the district levels, but it allows smaller polities to skip that intermediate layer.
Which simplifies administration and avoids wasting scarce resources on what might be an unnecessary bureaucratic layer for them.
Exactly. It's pragmatic constitutionalism.
Now let's move to the complexity of elections and composition, which is governed by Article 243C. This is where the framers implemented a really sophisticated blend of direct and indirect democracy.
And this blend is highly intentional. It's designed to achieve two different types of legitimacy and stability. First, all members at the village, intermediate, and district levels must be elected directly by the people. This is the first and most important level of legitimacy.
So every member is directly accountable to their specific electorate.
No exceptions there.
But the leadership, the chairpersons of the higher tiers, are treated differently. Why the indirect election mechanism for them?
Right. The chairpersons of the panchayats at the intermediate and district levels are elected indirectly. They are chosen by and from among the elected members of that panchayat. The rationale here is stability and, you could say, political maturity. These chairpersons manage larger administrative units and pretty significant funds.
Yeah, so you want someone who can command the respect of their peers.
Precisely. Electing them indirectly allows the representatives who understand the local political dynamics and the administrative requirements to select a consensus leader. This helps foster stability and prevents the higher tiers from becoming, excessively factionalized or bogged down by continuous direct campaigning for the top post.
And then there's the nuanced case of the village-level chairperson, the Sarpanch.
Yes, the election of the chairperson of a panchayat at the village level is the one area left entirely to the discretion of the state legislature. This flexibility acknowledges the immense variation in traditional village leadership structures across India.
So a state can choose what works best for its own context.
That's right. Some states opt for direct elections, which provides very high legitimacy. Others prefer indirect elections by the Gram Panchayat members, which might allow for greater political stability or adherence to traditional systems.
So understanding these three distinct election methods, direct for members, indirect for higher chairpersons, and state's choice for the village chairperson, is absolutely critical for mastering Part 9.
Definitely. Now, moving on to the duration and dissolution, the 73rd Amendment solved that historical problem of the arbitrary political murder of local bodies. So what does Article 243E mandate?
Well, Article 243E provides the guarantee of life. Panchayats now have a mandatory fixed term of 5 years. This predictability allows local bodies to actually plan long-term development strategies rather than just operating year to year under the constant threat of dissolution.
It elevates the Panchayat from a temporary executive committee to a permanent democratic institution. A real shift.
And what happens if the state government still decides to dissolve a panchayat prematurely? What is the constitutional check on that power?
The constitutional time limit is the check. It's a very strict one. If a panchayat is dissolved prematurely for any reason, elections must be held to reconstitute the body within a strict period of 6 months from the date of dissolution.
6 months? That's a hard deadline.
It is. And the only constitutional exception is if the remaining period of the dissolved panchayat's term is less than 6 months. In that case, you just wait for the general election. But this 6-month mandate is a potent safeguard. It ensures that the state government cannot simply abolish local democracy indefinitely for political reasons.
Finally, let's discuss the social justice mandate, which is enshrined in Article 243, the reservation of seats. This is, I think, arguably the most transformative social change initiated by the 73rd Amendment.
I would agree. It is genuinely transformative. Firstly, seats must be reserved for scheduled castes, SCs, and scheduled tribes, STs, at all 3 levels. And this reservation must be strictly proportional to their population within that particular panchayat area. This demographic proportionality ensures true, meaningful representation.
But the provision for women goes even further, institutionalizing gender representation in local power structures on a scale never seen before.
Yes. The mandate states that not less than 1/3, 33.3% of the total number of seats must be reserved for women.
And to be clear, that includes the seats already reserved for SC and ST women, right?
Correct. It's an inclusive reservation. Furthermore, Article 243D also mandates the reservation of the posts of chairpersons at all 3 levels for SCs, STs, and women, again with women holding at least 1/3 of the chairperson posts.
Let's just pause and consider the societal impact here. This one provision, overnight, led to the election of over 1 million women into political leadership roles across India. What are some of the known trade-offs or implications of this rapid mass political inclusion?
Well, the positive implications are very clear. You see increased women's participation, a greater focus on community needs like water, sanitation, and health, and the empowerment of marginalized women leaders. However, the constitutional mandate itself created a complexity. Rotation. Seats and chairperson posts reserved for SCs, STs, and women are rotated periodically by law.
And why is that a problem? It sounds fair on the surface.
While rotation prevents any single seat from being permanently locked up, which is good, critics argue that this continuous rotation prevents elected leaders, particularly women, from gaining the necessary administrative experience or building long-term political capital. It often leads to the challenges we'll discuss later in the challenges section, like the phenomenon of proxy rule.
Okay, so we've established the structure and the democratic mandate. But the real genius of the 73rd Amendment lies in creating these constitutional bodies designed specifically to insulate the panchayats from state political maneuvering. These are the twin pillars: electoral independence through the State Election Commission and financial independence through the State Finance Commission. Let's start with the SEC, governed by Article 243K.
The State Election Commission, SEC, is an autonomous constitutional body, and it's important to note it is distinct from the Election Commission of India. Its constitutional role is paramount. It holds the exclusive power of superintendence, direction, and control over the preparation of electoral rolls and the conduct of all panchayat elections.
All of them?
All of them. This single provision ensures the state executive cannot indefinitely delay elections or manipulate voter lists.
But the independence of the SEC is guaranteed not just by its function, but by the difficulty of removing its head, the state election commissioner. This is where constitutional parallels are so critical for your exams.
This is one of the most critical safeguards in the entire Act. The state election commissioner is appointed by the governor. However, their constitutional removal procedure mirrors that of the higher judiciary. The commissioner shall not be removed from office except in the manner and on the grounds prescribed for the removal of a judge of the state high court.
Why did the framers feel it was so necessary to grant the head of a state election body the exact same constitutional shield afforded to a high court judge? What was the specific risk they were trying to mitigate?
They were mitigating the primary risk inherent in any system of decentralization. The state executive's constant desire to control or subvert local democracy. It's a power struggle.
So if the SEC could be fired easily,
If the SEC could be removed easily by a simple executive order, the state government would simply remove any commissioner who insisted on holding elections on time. By mandating removal only through an address by the state legislature, supported by a special majority on grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity, which is a complex and politically high-stakes procedure, the commissioner is insulated from day-to-day political pressure.
and their service conditions are also protected.
Yes, their conditions of service are also protected, ensuring they cannot be varied to the commissioner's disadvantage after their appointment. This is the very definition of constitutional independence.
All right, now let's pivot to the crucial economic guarantee, the State Finance Commission, SFC, established under Article 243-I. As we noted earlier, money is the ultimate measure of true autonomy.
And the SFC is the mechanism for that. It's established every 5 years by the governor to review the financial position of the panchayats and to make recommendations. Its creation was an explicit constitutional measure to cure that chronic illness of fiscal starvation that plagued the earlier system.
What are the specific areas the SFC is mandated to review and recommend upon? Let's break that down.
Sure. Article 243 TI outlines several key areas that are central to local fiscal federalism. The SFC recommends the principles governing, first, the distribution of net proceeds of taxes, duties, tolls, and fees levied by the state between the state and the panchayats. That's the vertical and horizontal sharing.
Okay.
Second, the determination of the taxes, duties, tolls, and fees that may be assigned to or appropriated by the panchayats themselves. Third, the grants and aid to the panchayats from the consolidated fund of the state. And finally, any measures needed to improve the overall financial position of the panchayats.
This sounds, conceptually it's revolutionary. It converts what were discretionary state handouts into a constitutionally mandated, regularized devolution formula. But here's the key question. Does the state government have to accept the SFC's recommendations?
And that is the operational ambiguity that so often plagues the system. While the state government must table the SFC report and an action taken memorandum, or ATM, before the state legislature.
So they have to discuss it.
They have to discuss it. But the recommendations themselves are advisory. They're not legally binding on the state. The analytical point here is that the SFC is crucial because it mandates the review and it publishes the formula for devolution. This injects transparency and accountability, even if the final political will to fully fund the recommendations remains with the state legislature.
We mentioned that panchayats rely on several sources of funding. Can we break down the 4 main revenue streams for clarity for our learners?
Certainly. There are essentially 4 streams. First, devolution from the state government. This is the portion transferred based on the SFC's recommendations under Article 243-I. Second, grants from the union government. This is the central contribution, which is itself recommended by the Central Finance Commission under Article 280. That's a direct constitutional link between national funds and local bodies. Third, loans and grants from the state government and program-specific allocations, especially under centrally sponsored schemes, or CSS. These funds, however, often come with strings attached. They are tied funds. And fourth, internal resource generation, IRG. This includes the taxes and non-tax revenues that the panchayats are empowered to levy themselves, like property tax, water tax, market fees, and so on.
So the SFC's role is therefore not just about distributing money, but about standardizing the system of checks and balances, forcing a conversation about fiscal autonomy every 5 years. It's like the central nervous system for constitutional fiscal federalism at the local level.
That's a great way to put it, precisely. Its existence prevents that historical ailment of arbitrary financial neglect, even if the actual quantum of funds remains a contentious political issue. It creates a mechanism that the local bodies can appeal to, and it formalizes the relationship between the three tiers of government, fulfilling the true spirit of decentralization. Now, the 73rd Amendment, as powerful as it was, faced a very specific constitutional difficulty when it came to extending it to scheduled areas. These are areas predominantly inhabited by tribal populations, governed by the unique provisions of the Fifth Schedule under Article 244. Extending a standardized structure there risked eroding traditional systems of self-governance.
Absolutely.
This led to the necessity of special legislation. The Panchayats Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, or PESA, which was passed in 1996. And that's a key constitutional detail that's often missed. The 73rd Amendment provisions were initially not applicable to the Fifth Schedule areas. PESA was passed to extend those provisions, but with significant modifications and exceptions to ensure the protection of local tribal customs, traditional laws, and community resource management.
So the goal was not standardization here.
No, the rationale was the opposite. It was about enabling self-rule tailored to the specific cultural and administrative practices of tribal communities.
So the core purpose was to ensure self-rule for the tribal population and to safeguard their unique customs and traditions. How does PESA achieve this through the structure of governance?
PESA achieves this by fundamentally elevating the power of the most decentralized unit, the Gram Sabha. It is mandated to be the nucleus of all activities. In scheduled areas, the Gram Sabha, which is the assembly of all adult villagers, is given significantly heightened statutory and constitutional powers compared to its counterpart in non-scheduled areas.
This sounds like participatory democracy in its purest form.
It is. It's designed to respect and constitutionalize community decision-making.
What are the specific substantive powers that make the Gram Sabha in a PESA area so much more powerful than a regular Gram Sabha?
Well, PESA mandates that the Gram Sabha, or the Panchayats at the appropriate level, must be endowed with specific critical powers relating to community assets and land. These include 1. Mandatory consultation regarding land acquisition for development projects. The Gram Sabha has a crucial say in acquisition processes and is empowered to prevent or mitigate land alienation.
So you can't just take their land without their consent?
In principle, no. 2. They get ownership of minor forest produce, or MFP. This is absolutely vital for tribal livelihoods, and PESA shifts the control and management of MFP directly to the Gram Sabha, bypassing the Forest Department. They also have the power to enforce prohibition or regulate the consumption of any intoxicant.
Wow, okay.
And control over local markets and village plans, including the approval of all development schemes before they're implemented. And finally, they have control over institutions and functionaries in all social sectors, including primary schools, health centers, and controlling local moneylenders.
So PESA is not just about holding elections in tribal areas. It's about granting constitutional power over core livelihood and cultural resources, protecting the community from external exploitation or alienation.
Absolutely. It aims to evolve a suitable administrative framework that is consistent with traditional practices, allowing customs and traditional bodies to be integrated into the panchayat structure. It is a protective, empowering framework.
And structurally, it also reinforces the power hierarchy, preventing the higher tiers from becoming too centralized and dominating the lower ones.
That's the nuance of Section 4 of PESA, and it's a very important one. It aims to prevent panchayats at the higher level, so the district or intermediate level, from assuming the powers and authority of panchayats at the lower level, specifically the Gram Sabha. This ensures that decisions regarding village resources and cultural identity remain rooted in the village assembly itself, preventing top-down imposition of decisions.
This entire section is highly relevant for your mains analysis, particularly when you're linking constitutional administration to broader governance challenges. We see PYQs focusing on why governance gaps can lead to the growth of political instability or even extremism. How does PESA implementation, or lack thereof, relate to that context?
If we connect those dots, the failure to fully implement PESA is often cited as a major contributing factor to alienation in these areas. When the constitutional guarantees of autonomy, self-rule, and protection of customs, particularly the Gram Sabha's veto power over land alienation and its control over minor forest produce, are ignored or bypassed by state governments or higher administrative units, it leads to deep feelings of distrust and dispossession among tribal communities.
So PESA's full implementation isn't just an administrative issue.
Not at all. It's a critical tool for ensuring political stability, reducing governance deficits, and fostering genuine inclusivity in the Fifth Schedule areas.
So we have meticulously detailed the constitutional ideal. Now we must turn to the operational reality, which is absolutely crucial for delivering a high-quality mains answer. Despite 30 years of the 73rd Amendment, deep implementation challenges persist. Let's start with the most persistent weak link, the one that undermines the very idea of self-government: fiscal dependency.
This is the central paradox of the whole system. Despite Article 243I creating the SFC and Panchayats having the constitutional right to generate their own revenue, they remain overwhelmingly heavily dependent on government grants, both from the state and the center. The constitutional recognition has not translated into genuine financial autonomy, not even close in most cases.
Why does this dependency persist even in states like Kerala, Karnataka, or Tamil Nadu, which are otherwise considered quite progressive in decentralization?
The problem is really twofold: a lack of political will and a weak capacity for internal generation. First, political will. States have simply not given adequate attention to fully empowering panchayats to levy and collect substantive taxes. They are frankly reluctant to share the tax base, fearing a loss of their own revenue streams or, more importantly, their political control.
And the second reason?
The second is the capacity for IRG, or internal resource generation. The panchayat's own resources, the taxes and non-tax revenues they are allowed to collect, like property tax or water fees, are often described as meager. Furthermore, local elected representatives often fear a public backlash if they aggressively pursue tax collection, which leads to low compliance and low collection rates.
And this issue of dependency is compounded by the nature of the grants themselves. You mentioned tide funds earlier. Does that undermine local priority setting?
Absolutely. It's a huge problem. A large portion of central and state grants are often tied. They're earmarked for specific schemes, like building toilets under Swachh Bharat or a specific road project under a central scheme. While the funds are necessary, this practice means panchayats have very little flexibility to allocate resources based on genuine local priorities.
So they become implementing agents for centrally defined mandates.
That's it. They become implementing agents, not autonomous units deciding their own development path. The autonomy is constitutional, but the control is fiscal, due to this heavy reliance on tied grants.
Next, let's address the widespread issue of administrative and capacity deficits. Even if a flood of money arrived tomorrow, could the existing infrastructure effectively manage it?
In many, many areas, the honest answer is no. The infrastructure gap is alarming. Many gram panchayats across the country lack even basic office buildings, which makes administrative functions very difficult. Critically, there is a severe shortage of dedicated, technically qualified staff. Many panchayats lack a full-time secretary, let alone trained accountants, engineers, or planning specialists.
So the constitutional mandate asks panchayats to prepare these detailed plans for socioeconomic development. But often the staff and the data needed to do this effectively are just completely absent.
Exactly. The database for planning, monitoring, and program evaluation is often lacking in most cases. You can't plan for agriculture or infrastructure if you don't have reliable local data, which simply isn't collected or maintained. This forces panchayats to rely heavily on the administrative staff deputed from the state government, who may not have loyalty to the elected local body. Their loyalty is to their parent department.
And this brings us to the human capital challenge among the elected representatives themselves, especially considering the rapid influx of new, reserved categories of leadership.
This is perhaps the most fundamental operational barrier. While reservation ensures inclusion, and that is a massive achievement, a significant number of elected representatives of PRIs, particularly women and those from marginalized communities, are semi-literate or illiterate. Consequently, they know little about their roles, their responsibilities, the complex government programs available, or the administrative procedures required for fund utilization and project execution.
And if they don't understand the rules and regulations, who steps in to fill that technical and administrative vacuum?
Well, often, two entities fill that vacuum, and both of them undermine true self-governance. Firstly, the permanent state bureaucracy steps in. The block development officer, or the secretary, exercises de facto control because they possess the technical knowledge. And secondly, in the case of reserved seats for women, you often see the highly documented Sarpanch Pati phenomenon, where the husband or a male relative of the elected woman representative acts as the de facto leader, exercising the power without any of the constitutional accountability.
And this proxy rule just completely vitiates the spirit of the reservation mandate.
Completely.
Speaking of external interference, what is the role of political resistance from higher levels like MPs and MLAs in crippling the Panchayati Raj system?
This is a major area for analysis. Higher-level politicians often view the Zila Parishads and Panchayat Samitis not as partners in governance, but as political rivals. They see them as threatening their own patronage networks and their control over local development funds.
A threat to their power base.
Exactly. There is often deliberate political reluctance by state governments to devolve true power, staff, and finances to PRIs, because those funds and powers are resources that MLAs and state ministers prefer to control directly. This tension between centralized political control and the decentralized constitutional mandate is a permanent, ongoing feature of Indian federalism.
So to summarize the analysis for our audience, the constitutional foundation of the 73rd Amendment is robust. You have a fixed tenure, mandatory elections, the SEC and SFC protection. But the superstructure is unstable due to this political interference and a critical lack of fiscal and human capacity. This makes the system effective as a representative democracy, but often very weak as an administrative self-governing unit.
That is the precise critical conclusion required for a high-level assessment. The potential is clearly defined in the Constitution to plan for socioeconomic upliftment, linking local needs to national goals. But the implementation environment severely restricts that potential, forcing the system to operate far below its constitutional capacity. This is why when you approach man's questions on poverty alleviation, land reforms, or rural health, which are all subjects in the 11th schedule, you must connect the constitutional provisions to these structural capacity deficits.
That was an extensive deep dive into the 73rd Constitutional Amendment. We successfully tracked the Panchayati Raj system from its status as a non-justiciable directive principle under Article 40 to its full constitutional form in Part 9. We analyzed its mandated three-tier structure. We clarified the nuances of direct versus indirect election methodologies.
And we highlighted the crucial role of those two constitutional institutions, the SEC and the SFC, in their efforts to mandate electoral integrity and financial regularization.
Yes, and we dedicated significant time to examining the special mandate for scheduled areas under PESA, focusing on the centrality and specific powers of the Gram Sabha.
We connected that specific governance mechanism directly to broader issues of stability and social justice in fifth schedule areas. And crucially, we broke down the core challenges for your mains analysis. That crippling issue of fiscal dependency due to a lack of political will to devolve tax bases, and the pervasive capacity deficits rooted in poor infrastructure, lack of technical staff, and the subsequent problems of proxy rule and bureaucratic resistance.
This level of detail is absolutely vital. You should now be prepared not just for prelims facts like the 20 lakh population exemption or the High Court judge removal provision for the SEC, but for that critical analytical discussion in mains. That's where you're asked to critique the effectiveness of devolution and rural governance in India, linking the constitutional articles to policy outcomes and on-the-ground deficits.
And this brings us to a final provocative thought for you to carry forward and reflect upon. If the essence of the 73rd Amendment is to empower the local bodies, guaranteeing their democratic existence and a mechanism for financial review, yet the state governments remain constitutionally empowered to define the actual taxes the panchayats can levy, does the structural uniformity imposed by the Constitution truly achieve deep fiscal decentralization, or does it merely institutionalize dependency, forcing panchayats to remain perpetually subordinate extensions of the state government?
We hope this deep dive was incredibly useful for your preparation, helping you move beyond a surface-level understanding into true conceptual mastery. And please don't forget those key action points. We humbly ask you to subscribe. And if you are capable and find value in this detail, please consider joining our paid membership to support us in continuing to bring you this kind of useful, in-depth content tailored for rigorous preparation. And a final massive thank you shout out to all our existing members. Your support is truly invaluable. Please like this deep dive and drop your valuable comment below. What subject should we tackle next in this level of detail? And once again, remember, free notes with practice PYQs are waiting for you right now on our Telegram channel. And premium notes with extra PYQs and model mains answers for those tough mains questions are on the Discord channel for our Legend members. Do join there.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep deep diving into the essential texts. We'll catch you next time.